Okay, so welcome to the Lunch and Learn for March of 2024. Today we're going to talk a little bit about temperature control in winemaking and at what stages you need to be concerned about temperature and then how we can control temperature. This is one of the areas that's going to be really specific to your winery and what kinds of utilities or what kinds of design you're going for. I'm not going to get super technical. I'm going to show you some options, and then Kevin Fifo from Covered Bridges Winery is going to show you some stuff that he's built near the end of the presentation to give you some ideas that you can, kind of do this yourself. And it doesn't have to be super technical, but yeah, there's a lot of different ways I think to control temperature. And I'm going to focus mainly on why do we want to control temperature. So, okay, let's see if okay, get my slides working here. So, some of the stuff we'll talk about today, the stages of winemaking, and why you would want to control temperature at those stages. I'll show you some equipment, um, some basic equipment, but there's lots of options out there that you can pre-purchase. And then Kevin Fifo is gonna pop on here and talk a little bit about how he controls temperature in his winery. Um, there's a good chance. Well, actually, to be honest, I really focused on degrees Fahrenheit in this presentation, but being a Canadian, Celsius is where my heart lies, I guess. And in a lot of readings, you might see degrees Celsius because if things are made, equipment's made over in Italy or in Europe somewhere or things like that. You may, or Creveller, there's a tank company that's based in Canada. So this is some of my quick, uh, you know, cheat sheet, let's say, of temperature. 16 is 60 and 82 is 28 are the two that I use probably most often. But yeah, this is if you need a little, quick reminder instead of doing the entire math, this is I think a nice little chart to maybe learn a couple of these points. Okay, let's jump into it. Like I said, though, I think everything in this presentation is degrees Fahrenheit. I may say the Celsius as we go, though, just warning you all. Okay, so let's start in at harvest. We do need to consider temperature at harvest. We harvest here, at least in Iowa, in August and September, which means that you may be harvesting your fruit at quite a high temperature, right? You might be in the 80s, potentially in the 90s, and harvested fruit, will start to go bad, right? We need to protect the fruit, especially if we're not going to be processing it that day. And also, there are implications of processing hot fruit. So you need to be aware that this may take place, and that if you want to, pick at a cooler temperature, you probably want to start early in the morning. I do know some people are running their harvesters, their grape harvesters in the middle of the night. There are some wineries here in Iowa that are doing that in order to have cooler fruit temperatures. So, if there's a lot of wineries in the Midwest, I think, that are harvesting their fruit and storing it before processing. It may be convenient to harvest on the weekend if you have a crew coming in to help out. And then you might store it over the weekend until Monday or something like that. So lots of people are storing fruit at refrigerated temperatures. That's actually how we do it here. The Horticulture Research Station harvests the fruit, and luckily they have large refrigerated rooms that they can store the fruit in, and that's fine for several days. I haven't had any issues. You do want to refrigerate it though, and so you might not have a large enough room to refrigerate, but these refrigerated trucks are an option. You can rent those for a couple of weeks and forklift your or tractor your fruit right in there, and that way cool it down. So the reason you want to store your fruit at cooler temperatures, we want to prevent any native yeast, any yeast that are existing on the grapes, and there are, no matter how much you're spraying, no matter um, how clean you think your vineyard is, there are yeast that are right on those grapes, and they come in. They come into the winery from the grapes, and that's just always going to happen. Hansenia sporum uvarum is probably the most prevalent, and then there's obviously other yeast that we want to be concerned about, and bacteria. And so we want to prevent those yeast from starting up a fermentation. We want to control the fermentation and when that starts, and we want that to usually happen after processing. So we want to prevent that. We want to prevent browning. So PPO is an enzyme, and it is inhibited under 7 degrees Celsius. And so we want to prevent juice browning by cooling it to at least under 7 degrees Celsius. Above that, the enzyme is going to be active. One thing I did want to say though is that, and maybe it's more important post-processing, but DO pickup, dissolved oxygen pickup, happens in cooler temperatures. And I'm probably going to say that a couple of times at different stages of winemaking. Be aware that you're going to pick up dissolved oxygen at cooler temperatures. So even though a lot of what I'm going to say is cooler temperatures are best to preserve freshness or to prevent spoilage, blah, 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 you could be uptaking more dissolved oxygen. So doing things to combat that dissolved oxygen, using correct amount of free SO2, and using maybe sparging your wine with an inert gas is a good idea. At this point too, if you could spray the top of your fruit. If you machine harvested, you may want to add 30 to 50 ppm, especially if you're going to let it be sitting for a couple of days, again, to prevent any yeast from kicking off a fermentation. So yeah, lots of wineries have these refrigerated rooms, and you can buy them. Even if you've designed your winery and you're pretty, you're not looking to expand, a lot of these rooms come in a modular form, and so you just need to make sure you have enough room. And I know one winery that just had a move here in Iowa. They literally, dismantled it in the first winery, and rebuilt it in the second winery, and you'd never know the difference. But yeah, they were able to move that refrigerated room with them. The one thing I will say is be aware that you might not want a regular door on here. So for example, I have a refrigerated room downstairs near near our winery. And when we were building the winery, the one thing we wanted to do, and we haven't gotten it done yet, we can't get a full pallet into that door. So if you have a pallet of fruit or a macro bin, be aware, if that's how you want to be storing your fruit, that your refrigerated room might need a garage door or something that's at least big enough to get a pallet through. You can get half pallets and whatnot, but yeah, this is all, things to think about in terms of winery design. Okay, so fruit processing and settling. So this is pre-fermentation, post-fruit processing. I'm considering the traditional crush, destem, press if it's white or rosé, leaving the skins in contact if it's red. If the fruit is really hot and you're bringing it in that day and you want to process it that day, you may consider a heat exchanger, which is just a long series of pipes that has temperature control. They're jacketed pipes, and they will cool down the fruit, or cool down, sorry, the must, as it's going into the press or as it's coming out of the whole process. When I was making, when I was working in France and we were making rosé, we wanted the lightest color possible, right? We really wanted hardly any skin. any anthocyanin extraction from the skins. And we were also in Provence, very, very hot. So all of the fruit would go through the crusher destemmer, and on its way to the press, it would go through a long heat exchanger to cool that down so that we didn't pick up too much color in the press. Okay, so red, if we are doing red must skin contact, I recommend inoculating immediately. You can, if you had cooled that fruit down overnight, let's say you put it in a refrigerator room, make sure it does come up to, approximately, I'd say about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't want to be inoculating refrigerated temperature must. That's a surefire way of having a really long lag time or having yeast that are super stressed out. You want that juice or must to come up to a temperature that is not going to be um, not going to stress the yeast out too much. You can do cold soak. I don't have experience on this in terms of commercial winemaking, but one thing I want to say about cold soak is you really are you can only do this on excellent quality fruit. Okay, no fruit damage, no acetic acid that developed in the vineyard. Very, very little damage on the fruit as it was before it was picked. So be aware that cold soaks should only be used on fruit that was of really excellent quality. And the reason you might do a cold soak is that color and some aroma and flavor extraction is preferred in an aqueous environment. So in a water environment before the alcohol gets going, you are going to get color extraction. But if you want good, or more color extraction, more aroma flavor extraction, you may want to do a cold soak on some of your red varieties. And how you would do this, you're going to do this at fairly refrigerated temperatures, 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Add a little bit of SO2 to protect your wine so that you're not getting a wild yeast fermentation. And DO pickup. This is where you can pick up a lot of oxygen as well, which isn't. You've got a bit of wiggle room if it's before the fermentation. Yeast eventually, when you add them in there, will perform well if there's a little bit of oxygen. So, but dry ice coverage is a good idea if you are cold soaking. Get some dry ice. You can typically get it at your grocery store, crush it up, and that'll put a nice blanket of CO2 on your grapes and limit oxygen exposure. If you're doing white must or rosé, no, i.e. no skin contact, you might be making some reds with, very little skin contact. Um, there's all different variations, but you do want to settle out your solids, and doing that, you most likely, and I would recommend using a pectolytic enzyme. So something that is going to break down those pectins, which are the kind of the pulpy stuff in fruit and in our grapes, and we want to be breaking that down. We want to be doing fermentations with a little bit of those solids, but it's like 1 to 2% is the level of solids that you want in your wine. So you don't want to settle out a considerable amount of the solids. So using enzymes is a great idea, but know what temperature range your enzyme works at. And I encourage you all, I think we all get probably comfortable in our winemaking. Go and reread the manufacturer's instructions on your enzymes. I use Rapidase Clear Extreme, and that works. It's got a very wide range, 43 to 122, but you may be using an enzyme that has a very limited range, and you need to know what that is to get the most amount of pectin breakdown. So I encourage you, to every year when you're going to use these products, pick them up and reread the manufacturer's instructions and make sure that you are using these products in the way, not just dosage range, but temperature range, how long you should be using them, and that sort of thing. So when you're doing these these settling, you want to add a little bit of SO2, again, to prevent any kickoff of a fermentation. I do want to say, though, you don't want to add those two things together, okay? enzyme and SO2 at different time points. I add in, I'm going to say I add in the SO2 to the tank, and then as it's filling from the press, and then halfway I'll add in the enzyme. You don't want the SO2 to inhibit the enzyme activity. So different time points. Allow time to settle, and then again, bring that temperature up a little bit to, or make sure that your temperature is at a good temperature to start your fermentation. Okay, again, 40 degrees Celsius, sorry, 40 degrees Celsius, too hot. 40 degrees Fahrenheit, way too cold to be starting a fermentation. You're going to stress your yeast out. You're going to have a huge lag time, and you're probably going to get some H2S in there. Okay, yeast rehydration. I just wanted to mention this because, again, temperature is important for yeast rehydration. Typically, we're going to start at a warm temperature, right? That's the classical method of rehydrating your yeast is 37 degrees Celsius, 98 Fahrenheit, body temperature of humans, right? And the reason that they need to be warm is that the yeast need to reorganize their cell membrane. They've been freeze dried. They need to, as they come back alive, they need to, or rehydrate, they need to reorganize their cell membranes, and they do that well at a higher elevated temperature, and we need them to have nice cell membranes in order to uptake sugars, uptake nutrients, and for healthy fermentations. Now, I did want to bring up, there's a new product out there. I have not used it. I know a couple of people on here have used it, but it's called GoFirm Sterile Flash. So it provides a lot of sterols that yeast need for their cell membranes at a very high concentration, and so that you can do yeast rehydration at 60 Fahrenheit. And you also don't need to be adding in juice to acclimatize those yeast in terms of temperature and in terms of sugar shock. And it's a 15-minute rehydration total. I've heard mostly good things. I do think someone told me that it didn't work so well for them, but mostly good things about this. I haven't used it. Maybe I'll try it next year. But yeah, just it might be a product that helps you out. I have a hot water line in my winery, so it's not such a big deal for me, and I'm doing small fermentations. Smaller. Okay, fermentation temperature. This is a place where we do want to at least be measuring our fermentation temperature in case we need to control it. So red fermentations typically can go warm. Warm is not a bad thing for red fermentations. It's going to help with extraction of tannins, extraction of other phenolics, and color and anthocyanins. So temperatures can range. You can do cooler fermentations with reds. There's nothing wrong with that. Check the yeast that you do want to use. If the manufacturer's recommendation is a higher temperature or a lower temperature. I think there's variation out these days out there with different yeast strains that are available. Too cold and you will stress the yeast out. You'll get sluggish fermentations that might not finish all the way, and maybe minimal extraction. But that might be what you're going for. Okay, maybe certain varieties you don't want too much of a certain aroma, foxiness, or I don't know, a bitterness that you might find if you do a long, hard extraction. On the other side, too hot can also stress the yeast out. You can get too fast of a fermentation, and that can produce off flavors. Yeast don't mind going too fast, but we don't like it when yeast go too fast because they can start to produce H2S and things like that. They chew up through their nutrients too quickly. So do check your fermentation temperatures on a daily basis. When you're doing your Brix checks, you should be recording your temperatures as well. And it also is good for future reference because if you really like how a wine turns out, you might want to make sure that your fermentation temperatures are hitting the same point. For white must, we're typically doing these, again, exceptions to everything, but typically we're doing these at cooler temperature. And people say that it's to retain aromas and potentially, get the yeast to be making aromas that they do during fermentation, and that's desirable. So we're looking at white fermentations a little bit lower. I have heard people that had problems with their tank cooling, and their white temperature went too high during a fermentation. They were actually really, really happy with the wine. So, so experimentation isn't a bad thing, but typically the recommendations are usually cooler for white must. Stuck in sluggish fermentations, near the end there, if you've got a couple bricks left that you need to get you want your yeast to get through, you may need to heat those gently, okay? And whether if you have a good heat system in your winery, that'd be great. If you don't, we have, a little space heater that we use to heat our variable capacity tanks, or fish tank heaters, because they don't go too hot, are not a bad idea. If you need to gently heat a fermentation, give it a couple degrees. I'd say 3 to 4 degrees to try and boost those yeast to get finished. Post-fermentation. Okay, so this is where we're going to start to probably see more of the cool temperatures taking and wanting to cool down your wine. At the end of fermentation, you do want to use a combination of chilling, SO2, and racking. I think you really need to use all three of these to really finish off the fermentation and make sure it's done. And you want to do this to stop any spoilage yeast from growing, and yeah, start to preserve those fermentation flavors and aromas that and grape flavors and aromas that you worked really hard on. So the one thing I wanted to say here, though, is that in red wine, if you're performing, and there are white wines, you might want to perform an MLF as well. You need to make sure that not just your primary fermentation is done, but do make sure that your malolactic fermentation is finished as well. Don't crash cool your wines until that MLF is finished. Those bacteria are sensitive. They're sensitive to SO2. They're sensitive to cold temperatures, just like yeast are. And so if you want that MLF to completely go through, so yeah, ensure MLF complete before SO2 and cooling. I highly recommend a co-fermentation. We've been doing that now for a couple of years, and we see that the two fermentations are done, MLF and primary alcoholic, around the same time, maybe just a couple days, maybe a day or two in between. But that's been a good way of protecting your new fermentation, your new wine quickly. So consider a co-fermentation. I did want to go through quickly stability, because these are both related to temperature, cold stability and heat stability. And cold stability, we really do use temperature and cooling down your wine to crash out those potassium bitartrate crystals. And there's they can be calcium bitartrate as well, but you're crashing out tartrate or bitartrate crystals. And so this is what they can look like if you don't crash them out and they crash out in a bottle at the retail or at the customer's final destination, and they can look a little bit like glass. And so sometimes customers don't appreciate that in the bottom of their bottle. Sometimes they stick to the cork. Anyway, in the winery, we use cold temperatures for a prolonged period of time. Okay, that's the classic way of doing a stabilizing your wine against tartrate precipitation. And so the recommendation here is 28 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 to 3 weeks. Completely freezing your wine is not really recommended, because you're going to go through some weird you need those crystals to develop and have access to all of the wine. If you just actually freeze your wine at a really, really cold temperature, you're not going to get large crystal formation like you would if you seeded your wine with some tartrates or cream of tartar, and allowed it to be at 28 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. You're not going to freeze your wine. Okay. The freezing temperature of the wine is much lower than water. Okay. So, a lot of people do take advantage though of the cold temperatures here in the Midwest, stick their tanks outside if you can. Um, just on the flip side, there are new products out there that you can add in that prevent the precipitation. They bind to potassium and don't allow for the precipitation of potassium bitartrate. You need both. You need potassium and you need bitartrate in order for it to precipitate as a crystal. And so if the potassium is bound up, it won't allow that precipitation. And so that is available. There's products like Zenith Uno and from Enardis, and there's several products from Scott Labs. The names are, but that's not what we're talking about today anyway. Just letting you know, you can do the obviously you can do the classical method, but for some people like myself that don't have very good temperature control in our wineries, these products are out there. You do want to, if you are doing this this bitartrate stabilization, you do want to rack your wine cold. Be careful, you can have lots of DO pickup in that racking, but if you warm it up, you may get redissolving of those crystals. On the other side, there's heat stability, so that's actually protein stability. And this is if wine is stored at high temperatures, proteins can denature and agglomerate and cause a haze, like you can see in this picture. And this is where we use bentonite, which is negatively charged to interact with proteins. So we're not using heat in or cool temperatures in terms of heat stabilization. It's just that if you don't do this, if you don't bentonite fine your wine, you may, if a customer puts the wine at high temperature in the back of a trunk on a hot day, wine tasting or whatnot, they may see a haze form. So then, storage, before you're bottling the wine, your wine's just hanging out in a tank or a barrel maybe in your winery. You do want to be conscious of the storage temperature. I would say between 55 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit is, and so there's different ways you can do that, and I will talk about that in a minute. During this time, you do want to do regular analysis of free SO2 and acetic acid. During this storage, you're cool because you're trying to prevent wine spoilage, but you don't want to be so cool that you've got DO pickup and things like that. So make sure you are gassing your headspace to prevent any dissolved oxygen from getting in, or if you have barrels, you're topping up your vessels. So you do want to limit oxygen exposure as much as possible at this point. You've worked really hard on these wines. You're just about to bottle them. You do want to keep them at a cooler temperature, but be monitoring those quality aspects like free SO2 and acetic acid. And then post bottling, once you get your wine in bottle, you capped it, you've maybe labeled it, but you're waiting to sell it or waiting to release it. I would say you have maybe a little bit more wiggle room. You've probably, hopefully, you sterile filtered into the bottle, and so there shouldn't be any microbes left. But I would suggest storing, if you can, your wines at 60 to 65 Fahrenheit while you are waiting for that wine to be sold, especially if it's long term that you're going to be holding on to it before sale. I think, a couple of months, 6 months at room temperature is probably okay if the sterile filtration and everything went all right in your wine, or sorry, during your bottling. So but if you're going to be hanging on to that for a really long time, I would, keep it at a slightly cooler temperature. Equipment, how are you going to do this? One way to get decent temperature control is just to keep your winery or your cellar at a cooler temperature. So keep your winery at 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and that can help. I mean, I have variable capacity tanks that don't have jackets. So this is a temperature we keep our wine at, or our winery at, and so the wines are just naturally at that temperature, and I can get away without having too much equipment. Now, I'm a really small winery. If I expanded any more or did larger volume, I would want to probably have have the opportunity or have the ability to control each individual tank. Um, the other option at a winery obviously is to have that refrigerated room or a large refrigerator to be storing things if you need to. Um, and so if you're thinking about getting a refrigerator room for storing a fruit and things like that, consider what temperatures they can go up to if you want to be storing wine afterwards, after fermentation. You don't necessarily need that super that refrigerated temperature, but maybe can you keep it at 55? So good things to ask when you're installing these kinds of things. A chilling unit. So there's lots of different chilling units out there. They are going to be um, an important investment for your winery. The cheapest one I saw was $7,000. Okay, so not a cheap piece of equipment, but an important piece of equipment in terms of protecting your wine. So there's different units. Most of them are probably you could use water or glycol. I think most people are using probably glycol, but there are, I saw some units I was looking at that you can use water chilling instead. Portable units versus stacking units. So it depends on the size. It depends on the capacity that you need. And so when you're going into the design of your winery or you're going into retrofit your winery with a cold cooling temperature system, or I should just say a temperature system, because you can, warm your tanks with water as well, or glycol. But know your capacity and your future goals. Okay, so don't. If you're producing a certain amount now, that's fine. If you want to stay at that quantity, but if you do want to add more tanks, add more production, you may want to invest up front in a chilling unit um, that can accommodate that. So if you do want to cool tanks, there's different ways to do it. There's jacketed tanks, which I'll show a couple of pictures of in a second. There's coils, there's plates. So that's if you don't have, um, or if you want to cool each individual tank. So just these are some portable. This one on the left here is a portable unit, and there's lots of different options here of how big these are, how many tons they can cool, but also what type of power you can use. So three phase, one phase, that sort of. Most of them are three phase, but the smaller ones, there are a couple that you can get one phase. So this is where, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a heating and cooling specialist. I would highly recommend working with one to figure out what your winery needs are. Um, but this is an option of what a one that would be on wheels, so you could wheel it around and cool different tanks. You can set them up in series as well, and that way you're cooling, multiple tanks at once with just some really simple piping. The other one is a non-portable, it's a stackable unit. And so this one, I think particular picture was a 10-ton unit. I think this was a 1.8 on the left. Anyway, variation in size. There was, 5-ton all the way up to like 30-ton, and probably even greater than that if you have a really large winery. So lots of options out there if you want a portable unit or not. And then how are you gonna, how are we ch chilling our tanks? I'll go through the barrel picture in a second here, but we've got a jacketed tank. So the jacketed part is just the dimples at the top and in the middle here. So that's where the water, the glycol um, uh, flows. And usually it's on the back side of the tank that these hookups are, because um, they're not as pretty in a winery to have all these hookups. So I think that's what and if you have piping along the back of your along the walls, that's where they would hook up. And then you can, let's say you already have a bunch of tanks or variable capacity tanks, and they don't have jackets on them. You can use things like these plates, especially the variable capacity. The plates are probably good because if they're a little bit wider, and so the glycol is going to run through these coils on the plates and chill or warm. You can do warming as well. Um, And there's also plates that you can even get to go right into macro bins if you want to control the temperature of your fermentations. Um, and then this is just a coil here in the middle, that again, you can run, the beer industry uses these coils quite often. And I think the one that you're going to see from Kevin looks somewhat similar to that. This picture in the upper left corner is a winery I worked at in France, and they considered themselves to have the Rolls Royce of temperature control. These are barrels that are 500 liter, so double in size essentially from the standard barrel size. We would do our fermentations right in the barrel, rosé. So they do have a port on the back. You can't see it, but you can see the temperature probe here. There will be a temperature probe, and that's the other thing. In any tank that you are going to have a chilling or a heating unit, you do want to be monitoring the temperature, right? We don't just set it and forget it, kind of a thing. Make sure that you are monitoring what that temperature is truly at, and that can be as advanced with apps and wall units, down to just using a old school thermometer. Anyway, so with these barrels, through the bung hole was these coils are going in and heating or cooling the wine during fermentation. You might want to heat it a little bit to get some of those yeast to finish up. And then all of the glycol or water, they would change it over halfway through, after the fermentations, they would, I think, put glycol in the line. But everything would run through these pipes and tubing essentially over top. It may look really cool. I will say when you've got this many joints and connections, there was a lot of random leaking. So be aware of that. The more connections you're going to put in somewhere, the more water can just start spraying out of places. And so it might look really cool, but was it really necessary? I don't know. It did work. It did work to cool or heat the barrels up. Okay. And then I'm going to ask Kevin to come in here. He's got some pictures of some homemade temperature control, but they look, I mean, they look really good. So I'm going to ask Kevin if he wants to take it over, and I'll flip through some slides and he can explain what he did and what he does in terms of temperature control.
Thanks, Aaron. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Oh, you didn't get the extra slide that I put in there. All right.
Oh, shoot. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. I got it on my other monitor, so I just want to talk to it.
Do you want to share your monitor?
No.
Okay.
That would present probably too many technical challenges to do in real time.
Got it.
So I just put up a couple of talking points on this. As we're going through this, I'm a poor winemaker. I can't afford all the big toys and stuff. And jacketed tanks are really expensive. And jacketed tanks are inflexible. You've got specific sizes that are available. We bring in batches of wine or juices that are coming in all different sizes, whether it's 300 liters or 3,000 liters of wine and juice that we're trying to keep cool. So flexibility is important in our winery. And all of the stainless parts tend to be really expensive. So years ago, there was a design in Winemaker magazine to take an old air conditioning unit and essentially take the cooling coil out and put it in an igloo cooler. And you're kind of hacking together this little tiny chiller. And we did that, but getting that cold glycol into the wine tank was the challenge. So with a little bit of research, I came up with a way to build your own cooling coils. And that's kind of what some of these pictures are showing. All of the parts are available. I get them from McMaster Car, McMaster.com. You can go out and browse. The fun thing about this, or the easy thing about it, is the flexibility that you get with that. The coil on the top right picture, the tape measure is hard to see. It's about 24 inches in diameter. It is 50 feet of half-inch stainless steel coil. The fittings are down on the bottom. The left is a compression fitting, and then the right two are a male and a female quick connect fitting. So with those simple parts, you can put together these coils, and now you've got the flexibility to drop it into an individual tank. You can drop it into a macro bin to chill your red must that's coming in. Couple of things on if you're going to try to build one of these things yourself. First of all, you can't use copper coil. You've got to get stainless steel coil. The acids in the juice and the wine will A, erode the copper, and B, will leave residual copper in your wine. And that is a no-no because those are federally limited. With the cooling coils here, 50 feet of half-inch stainless tubing, I can cold settle a 600-liter tank, which is a 158-gallon tank, and I can crash the temperature in that down to 40 within about 12 hours. So they're fairly effective there. I can control fermentation temperatures on 1,000-liter tanks and keep them at the 58 degrees with a single coil like this. And then you can also drop it into the macro bin, like I said, and you can keep the temperature at bay on about 1,200 pounds of fruit in a macro bin. So they're real flexible. They're real easy. Top left, we do have a glycol chiller. We pump chilled glycol into through piping through the floor of the winery. Come up top left is a PEX manifold. So half-inch fittings. There are 8 sets of them on this. There's an in and an out. One side's in, one side's out. So build these coils. You can connect up to 8 individual coils and control fermentation temperatures on all of them. Because these don't fit through your lids, they're really only effective for pre-fermentation chilling and controlling temperature during the fermentation itself or in the macro bin, because you don't really have a way to seal it up and keep them cold. The picture that Aaron showed on the previous slide, the coil itself had fittings that go through the top of your tanks and can keep things, keep the oxygen off of that. So if you want to flip to the next slide, Aaron, I'll kind of show you the finished product. So top left, you can see it's just braided half-inch tubing that we use to the female quick connect, and then we put the male quick connect on the stainless tube itself. And on the right, you see them connected together. As you're doing this, and I think it's probably good practice all the way around, Aaron mentioned leakage and dripping. If you're using glycol in your chiller, make sure that your glycol is food grade. That way, a couple of drops of glycol isn't going to ruin a batch of wine for you. These quick connects, I've been using them for more than 10 years. I've never had any leakage with them, but better to be a little bit safe than sorry. I can't remember what else I had in there. Oh, yeah. Next slide. So kind of finished product. There's not really good places to take pictures of these. With the coils themselves, you can spread them out. So if you have a tank that happens to be 48 inches tall or one that's 60 inches tall, you can spread them out and distribute that all the way around. You don't have to use glycol in these. You don't have to have a glycol chiller. You can circulate chilled water. You can circulate the warmed water through these. So the flexibility they allow is really nice. You can hook up as long of braided poly tubing as you need to reach your tanks. So if you don't have access to it, you can put 20 feet of poly tubing on it and get it across the room. So they've worked really well for us over the years. I've got 5 or 6 of them, and we do have a handful of jacketed tanks, but with those 2, I can cool up to 10 containers at a time. The one limitation of this, at least at the moment, I'm going to try to work on a solution and maybe present here later, is individual temperature control in the tanks. Right now, everything is going to go to the temperature of your glycol. So if you're at fermentation and set your glycol tank to 60, then everything's going to be 60, which is great if you're fermenting whites. But if you have another tank of white that comes in that you need to cold stabilize, or cold settle, I should say, getting that tank to 40 while the others stay at 60 is a little bit of a challenge. Nothing that we can't overcome with a little bit of timing and a little bit of manual intervention. So that's what we do. It works for us. If you're interested, drop me a note or drop Aaron a note. We both have links to the parts that we use to build these. So
Awesome.
that was
Thank you
everything I
so.
had there.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Kevin. That was yeah, it can be it, if you're willing to put in the time, the research like Kevin did, and thank you for bringing up a couple of points like copper and food grade glycol and things like that, you can do a lot of things yourself. I will say, you know, and Kevin mentioned when it comes to individual tank temperature control, I mean, you can get really expensive as well, right? So there's a lot of variability here. The point, though, the major point that we need to get across is you need to be aware of it. You need to be aware of what you can do in your winery and what stages your winemaking is at. Kevin also brought up a good point of just organizing yourself in terms of your harvest and then your winemaking uh, steps later on, and just making sure that you've got the equipment to do everything and can maintain, you know, the appropriate temperatures of things. So I really appreciate Kevin coming on and sharing some of his experience. And again, you know, $7,000 for the cheapest portable chiller. It can be somewhat prohibitive. And so being creative is important. And it's my job though to make sure to tell you, you know, please consider these things because they are important in winemaking. And my biggest, and I say this every single time, you work really hard in the vineyard, you work really hard in the winery, and the last thing you want is for a tank to go off for any reason. And temperature is one that can help control a lot of issues. Okay, let me. So I'm gonna stop recording here in a second, but if you do have any questions, please reach out. If you have questions for Kevin, feel free to reach out to me and I'll connect you to Kevin. Kevin did share links to everything with me. Maybe I'll put those when we do when we put this up on YouTube, we can put some of those links underneath in the description. Please sign up for our newsletter. We've got one coming out this week. And hopefully that's going to have a nice memoriam to Murali Dharmadakari, our founding director who recently passed away. So please subscribe and check that out later this week. We've got upcoming Lunch and Learns. We've got the one in April. I'd like to talk about sterile filtration and how to do a bubble point test. I'm going to do that tomorrow, and I'm going to do that later on in the month. I'm going to do my own bottling and sterile filtration and bubble point test and all the rest. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And May 6th, Randall Voss has a grant with SARE. He's been doing some work mechanization in the vineyard. Check him out on Facebook or Instagram. He's got some really nice pictures of mechanical pruning. And then in June, actually, Kevin here suggested, can we talk about esters and thiols and what are those? What are those aromas? What kinds of smells do they give us and how do we promote them and how do we know and learn a little bit more about them? So that's going to be in June. All right, if I can figure this out. Stop recording.